Hey guys, Zane from the Infinite Jukebox here with another album review, and today I wanted to talk about the new spelling record, Spelling and the Mystery School. After garnering a huge amount of praise in alternative and largely online music communities, something that probably had at least a little bit to do with a certain Anthony Fantano giving it one of his very rare 10s, 2021's The Turning Wheel was a bit of a surprise smash hit in general within the indie scene, at least, for Chrystia Cabral, the single individual behind the mononym name Spelling, the Baroque art pop synth pop artist that has been creating some of the most unique and experimental pieces of underground pop music over the course of the past few years. And you know what? While I don't think it's a perfect album personally, the hype was deserved. The Turning Wheel is absolutely phenomenal. I mean, most everything that she'd done beforehand was good, but really, The Turning Wheel, as far as really experimental pop music goes over the course of the past couple years, essential through and through. And the fact is, after The Turning Wheel dropped, Cabral was suddenly really just given a huge audience all of a sudden. I mean, not massive in the sense of mainstreamness, but in the grand scheme of indie musicians, she's one of the bigger names to look out for right now. And as such, it only makes sense that she would want to kind of go back to some of her earlier releases and pick some favorite songs from those records to reintroduce to her widened audience now in some form or another, especially now that she has a single entire backing band that accompanies her on tour that is creating an entire new sound for her, as we see right on this record. To put things simply, Spelling and the Mystery School is a record that sees Cabral, as well as her backing band, go through a variety of songs from across the Spelling catalog and really just rework them in a way that's probably better than they have any right to be. I mean, really, this record is fantastic, and it probably shouldn't be considering what it really is, which is just revamps of old songs. Look, I have nothing against re-recordings, but I don't think I'm really giving out a hot take here when I say that a lot of them tend to be pretty lukewarm and just pale in comparison to the original, especially if it's an artist's really well-known or signature song that they're just redoing for one reason or another. And the exact opposite is the case here. Nearly every single song in this record is better than the original, and that's saying something because they were, for the most part, already really good. I mean, obviously, the primary selling point of a record like Spelling and the Mystery School is hearing some fan-favorite cuts from the Spelling catalog being put into a new context, into a general different setting, and you know what? That is true, to a pretty fair extent on this record. That being said, I think that for some people, it may be a bit unexpected how different and unique these songs feel from their original counterparts. I genuinely think that a lot of the tracks here feel like entirely original pieces, and if you weren't someone who was familiarized deeply with her catalog up to this point, you probably wouldn't even be able to guess that these weren't just brand new songs that were cooked up for the sake of this album alone. After the incredibly lush, artsy Baroque pop of The Turning Wheel, this record in particular really gives things a raw, emotive feel that's honestly only a couple steps away from the sounds of a typical live album, and that does kind of make sense considering this is basically live in the studio. And similar to a live album, a lot of the work here manages to just really put an emphasis on certain qualities of songs that you just don't hear in your typical studio version, or in this particular case, the original versions of these songs. There are a lot of different small details and qualities that you don't really learn to appreciate, or maybe just don't appreciate as much as you should, until you hear them in such a loose and free-form format. I mean, really, for me, at least, a major quality point of this record is just how it accentuates all these small but still great details overall. I mean, you have songs like the Hard to Please reprise, where that just really beautiful closing melody on that track is really just sort of put into the limelight a little bit more than it was in prior incarnations of the song. Or you have other tracks like Walk Up to Your House, where the slight, subtle, dark eeriness of that track is really cranked up to at least a solid 8 or 9, maybe not quite an 11, but nonetheless to the point that it feels like a more unique song, even more unique than the original, more ambient-focused track that came from her first full-length LP. My point is that all of these songs on here are done in the past by Spelling. They have been done. They are songs that belong to the Spelling catalog already. They aren't new tracks being introduced for the very first time to you, the listener, or me, the listener, for that matter. But at the same time, they do feel like new songs. There's so much focus being put on different qualities of these songs and different instrumental aspects and different artistic aspects of these different tracks that they feel like new compositions all the same. Really, just all of these songs take a stance that's unique to that of their original formats, and Chrystia Cabral's vocal work is perfected as well. I mean, she is a perfectionist of a vocalist if I've ever heard one within the current indie pop scene, and that is beautifully on display here, and really she suits the more live, not necessarily rough and tumble, but again certainly more loose setting perfectly. I mean, you have again a lot of what sounds like semi-improvisation here, a lot of more, again, experimentation in regards to not so much jamming, but just more careless, intentionally careless, I should specify, instrumentation, that I feel like having one individual, in this case Cabral's vocal work, just really kind of anchoring things. It's pretty perfect. The main point that I'm trying to get across here is that these songs are not just sloppy bastardizations of what were already good tracks in the first place. I mean, as far as the original versions of the songs on this album go, there is not a bad track to be found, but at the same time, it does feel like Spelling as a project, if you will, whether you're just talking about Cabral or you're talking about the backing band, has never felt more human here, has never really felt more alive. I mean, obviously, that's not a dig at any past releases that have come under the Spelling name, but at the same time, this is, again, a very live-feeling kind of album, live in the studio, as I said, and with that comes a record that is an entirely unique experience for any fan of this project in particular. The sort of free spirit that's found in the instrumentals throughout this entire record is something that could only be experienced 100% live or on a live album maybe by any lesser band, and the fact that they were able to capture that in the studio really just shows how magical the current lineup of Spelling really is. I mean, theoretically, it is again just a mononym of Chrystia Cabral, but at the same time, Spelling is kind of the touring band too, so I'm gonna count that. I think there also is certainly something to say about how well executed the revamped songs from the Turning Wheel are on here, because although this album does generally seem like its intention is more so to reintroduce pre-Turning Wheel songs to her newer fan base, there are still some Turning Wheel tracks here. In fact, some of that album's most beloved songs are being restructured on this record. For example, the Turning Wheel's unquestionable, seemingly unanimously agreed upon, at least to some extent, highlight, Boys at School, is given an appropriate and frankly outstanding reinterpretation here that gives the Mystery School version of it its own unique identity, and it manages to stack up to the original's Baroque art pop sound, both in terms of creativity and even intensity. In fact, I actually think there's an argument to be made that this version of Boys at School maybe outshines the original a little bit in terms of the latter category. The same can pretty much be said about every single other Turning Wheel track here that's been redone, songs like Always and Revolution, which are given the chance to be sized up in this new form against their other versions from this prior record, and they fare very well in that battle of comparison. They are great reworkings of already amazing songs. Spelling and the Mystery School, upon first glance, especially when you take in the fact that there are some Turning Wheel tracks mixed in with pre-Turning Wheel songs from Spelling on this record, it kind of feels on paper like it would, or at least should be, a cheap attempt at trying to get a larger, widened fan base from the Turning Wheel to take a look back at previous Spelling releases. And while that would be fine, respectable, generally speaking, the idea doesn't seem to be too terribly promising, which is why it's so impressive that not only can Spelling really just do an amazing, amazing thing by turning those older tracks into stunning pieces that feel entirely unique and modernized for the project, but it can also take songs from the Turning Wheel, which are just a mere 2 years old at the time of me reviewing this record, and turn them into something that has a completely unique sound that really can't be compared to anything else in the catalog up to this point. I mean, this record is a unique, distinct beast for the time being. The big focus here, of course, is really how heavily improved upon the pre-Turning Wheel songs are. I mean, I know I've touched on that a bit at this point, but I really do need to get across how many songs from non-Turning Wheel Spelling albums are just made entirely stunning on this record, that they really weren't originally, even if they were strong. I would personally argue that the biggest example of this is the album opener to Mystery School, the previously mentioned Walk Up to Your House, which was before featured on 2017's Pantheon of Me, the first LP from Spelling, and you know what? That album is very okay. Honestly, the original album, Walk Up to Your House, is probably a highlight, I would say. It's a good song on that record on what's a decent album overall, but both are far from being great. And here, it's a major highlight on an album filled with potential highlights. It's a major jump forward, I will say that. More importantly, I do think that Walk Up to Your House is a great example of how this record reinterprets some of those older tracks. I mean, it takes all of the good qualities about that original song and removes all of the negative qualities. It just keeps all the good and gets rid of the bad. For example, gone are the incredibly bare bones and somewhat tiring and maybe unintentionally weary sounding instrumentals of minimal synth style from the original Pantheon of Me record, and now there is a more elegant yet sinister vibe to the song overall that I personally think suits it a lot better and ultimately makes for a general atmosphere that is significantly more striking than its 2017 counterpart. Nonetheless, what remains in this version of the song, unchanged for the most part at least in terms of bass elements, are the elements that made the original song good in the first place. I mean, Chrystia Cabral's very cryptic poetry and vocal work is still stunning on here, just as it was back in 2017. Or the bewildering, yet still kind of like shocking in the best way possible interpolation of 3 6 Mafia's song of the same name. It's something that kind of caught me off guard, threw me through a loop when I heard the original, just because it's so unexpected from a project like Spelling. And it threw me through even more of a loop now, because it makes even less sense with all of the dark wave influences going on in that track on this record in particular. But you know what? It's still unique. It still sounds great. It fits. It makes for an interesting experience, especially for those who kind of have the lore of Spelling down a little bit, if you will. I just really think that all of these pre-Turning Wheel songs, they were reinvented, sure, but they were reinvented via removing everything that made them weak in the first place compared to later Spelling efforts, and they kept all of the amazing qualities about them that made them decently strong in general in the first place. I mean, these original songs would have been amazing by the standards of any other artist. It's just that Chrystia Cabral kind of blew them out of the water eventually with her own work, and now she's reworking those older songs so that they can stand alongside her more recent releases. Similar comments could generally be made about tracks like Haunted Water and Under the Sun from 2019's Mazy Fly, and as a whole, I really just do think that Spelling and the Mystery School is a phenomenal bridge between the best parts of some of the pre-2021 Spelling work and the pop artsiness of the Turning Wheel and what has come after that. I think it's a masterclass in how to take material that may not really stack up to your more recent work and rework it until it does. Spelling in the Mystery School on paper seems like it should be a flop follow-up to a potential magnum opus. I'm not saying it's going to be a train record of any kind when you just hear of the idea, but really when you think about how one of the most beloved albums of its given year, The Turning Wheel in 2021, is being followed up by an album that's just reworkings of a bunch of different songs from the catalog of the same artist, including some songs from The Turning Wheel, the most recent Spelling album. It just doesn't sound like it's going to turn out good. It sounds like that ambition is just tossed out the window and replaced with complacency to re-record older songs. But that's not really the case, but it kind of is at the same time. On one hand, yeah, there are themes of reinvention and artistic reincarnation found throughout this record that are directly applied to the songs themselves. This is an album that is almost entirely based around the idea of, hey, what would happen if we took this song from 2017 and turned it into the sound that we're doing in 2023? That is the base concept of Spelling and the Mystery School as a listening experience. There's no getting around that. Now, with that in mind, you would also be hard-pressed to find an album of self-reinterpretations that has songs that sound as fresh as those found here. Perhaps it's the natural reflectiveness or sense of false nostalgia that kind of comes with the concept of re-recording older songs, but it really does feel like Spelling in the Mystery School is a bit of a final chapter. It definitely has a sense of finality about it, at least. I'm not saying that this is the final Spelling album or anything, but it does kind of feel like this is the final page for a chapter of a much, much longer novel. Then again, I guess you can say that about every great album that's really dramatic and beautiful. All I can say about this record is that if you have any apprehensions relating to the idea of an artist re-recording songs, even if they're only a handful of years old at this point, throw them out the window. Just forget about them. Drown them in the nearby river. This is an amazing album and you should hear it. Look, I'm not Chrystia Cabral, probably, maybe, so I can't really say what she's going to do next, but all I can say is that I think the real mystery is just what she's going to sound like on her next album, and if it's any as good as this, then it's going to be pretty great. Or maybe the real mystery was the friends we made along the way. I'm going to give this record 4 stars out of 5. With that being said, that is the end of this album review. I've been Zane from the Infinite Jukebox. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.